go ahead and turn it over to Rachell.
Hello, my name is Rachell Johnson, and this is taking the myths out of AAC evaluations and treatment. And just going to say greetings to everyone from South Carolina, and just a little background on who I am. I am an assistive technology team lead with Florence One Schools in Florence, South Carolina, and I work for the Stepping Stones Group. I'm also an independent AT consultant with Minnesota Technology for Home program. And my background is speech language pathology. I serve on many interdisciplinary teams in the past, including being the program manager for the DC, Maryland, and Virginia chapter of the, or not the program manager of the chapter, but a program manager for assistive technology for the DC, Maryland, and Virginia chapter of the ALS Association. I've worked with AAC from birth to geriatric and assistive technology. And so these experiences that I might share when it comes to a case example, I'll try and do a good job of giving you both adults and children. So in this webinar, we will examine research regarding AAC myths. We're going to discuss AAC myths versus realities. We're going to look at past myths, present myths, myths that just won't go away. We're going to explore the effect of AAC myths on people with disabilities and even their families. We're going to do that with an interview with a family member, and we'll also get to do that with some case studies as well, or case examples as well. And lastly, we are going to talk about why I chose the galaxy theme for this presentation. What is that analogy about I am Groot, that Guardians of the Galaxy character? Why did I choose that for this topic? So we'll get into that. So the first thing we're going to talk about is AAC myths and a glance at origins and history. So there is a research article that I wanted to share with you guys. And what I did was I put at the two links that I'm really going to refer back to. But one is this article here. And it is an older article, but even though it's older, it has some really good topics in here. It delves into some myths. In fact, this article kind of looks at 6 common myths that you see in AAC, and kind of dispels them with research. And also, if you kind of read, into the article, you'll find that some of the myths come from our own teachings in our profession. So you'll find that something was believed and taught as this is the case with typical developing children, this is, and then later research, kind of changed the thinking on that. But that's kind of where some of, some of our myths have come from. Okay, and gonna move my tools to a different area. The other article that I wanted to share, or it's actually a resource, is from the Tobii Dynavox website. And again, I'm a speaker disclosure, I'm not by no means compensated by Tobii Dynavox, and I do not work for them. But I love this site, this link, What is AAC? Busting AAC Myths. I think that it's a good resource for any family or AAC user to have, or therapist, no matter what device you're working with or technology tool you're working with. And so I'll be referring to some of the article links today from this. Okay, so to get into some of those like these are the most maybe common, and it's just an introduction, and then we'll delve into ones that I see, every day in practice. But here we go. So AAC is the last resort to intervention. How often have we heard that? So with it being, with people thinking that it's the last resort, it's almost like they're saying we have to try all these other things, and if they don't work, then we'll try AAC. And we just know that that's not the case, right? So this article, it does, that I linked it does take you to AAC can be provided too soon after a neurological event, which is, also a myth. That's not true. But I took you to this article for that topic just because it had really good talking points. So, the first part might be talking, only about neurological events. But if you keep scrolling through the articles, you'll find some other topics within that, or other talking points. Another way of saying the same myth that I just said is AAC is a bandage at best and a last resort at worst. And there are naysayers that truly feel this way, and it's really our job, as therapists, to educate everyone, and that it's not a bandage, and you don't have to wait to use it. It's a tool that you can use, right away. Another one, AAC stops natural speech development, and we know that that's not true. It actually encourages natural speech. Children must have a certain set of skills to use AAC, and we know that that's not true. If I go back to the to this article, and I'm gonna I have it here. Myth 3. I just love how it kind of takes you into the past. And there was a time in our profession that it was thought that because of the development of children, and that maybe their sensory motor development, or cognitive development, that if they hadn't reached a certain point in their development, they weren't ready for AAC. And we know that essentially just isn't true. And I love the quote here from Toby Dynavox. I'm not sure who came up with this quote, but I think it's here, that the truth is the only prerequisite is breathing. And that's just a powerful statement. And I love it. You try AAC. You don't just leave it on a shelf for the last resort, or thinking that they have to, it's not a baton that you pass, as the illustration that I've used in the past. It's not a relay race, that we only tag in, AAC at a certain point. And so another set over here on the left of myths that are commonly used and been proven false by research. AAC is only for children with intact, cognition. And I took you to the same link about the neurological event because it had more talking points. But again, no prerequisite. So you meet them on the cognitive level that they're at. Children have to be a certain age to benefit from AAC. And I see that that we kind of have that going on at the front end and the flip side of that. And what I mean by that is, we'll say, oh my goodness, they're too young. But then if the child or young adult is older, at the other end, you're saying, oh, but they're too old to learn it now. So they're catching it on both sides. And so we just really have to stop that type of thinking. It can be very detrimental to the potential communicator. Children, and so this last one, there is a hierarchy of symbols objects to words, and or that I have to use some type of low tech tool and excel at that before I can be introduced to something high tech. So that type of thinking has been dispelled. So one thing that I love about the articles that that are linked on that Toby Dynavox site was just, I like the research that they state, and then at the end they do a nice summary of all the articles so that you can go and look at those and form your own opinions if you would like to look that up. So I just think they're nice summaries. You can use them as talking points. It's a good resource for your practice. So moving on, I'm just closing out some of our tabs so we can keep going. We're going to talk about myths versus realities in AAC evaluations and experiences and case examples. So high tech is the best tech. I have seen this so many times, and I am guilty of this one because we get so excited, don't we? We get so excited when there's a new technology, or when a technology has worked so well for these clients or these students or this person, and so it must be the best thing for the next person. And we can kind of get caught up in that, but we have to be careful not to get caught up in that thinking. The reality is that low-tech solutions are also very successful, and that you can recommend both at the same time, and that we should be, right? Because a high-tech solution isn't always going to work 100% of the time. There's going to be times where it's off, where it is being updated, in for repair, where it may not work in a certain environment or lighting. So you always do need a low tech and should be exploring both in your evaluation. And I have talked about here the SETT framework, SETT, and I think there's a link to it in your resource list. But if I didn't put the link, forgive me, and please look it up if you're not familiar with SETT. But it's Joy Zabala's was involved in that framework of creating it. SETT stands for Student, Environment, Tools, and Tasks. And so are we actually finding out what the AT or AAC user and their family would like to use? They're part of that S and that E, right? And so one example that kind of taught me this very early on, back in my days of working with ALS, we were working with a family, and we did not ask maybe enough of the right questions to find out what really are they interested in using. And I think a lot of times this is where device abandonment starts. And when you're talking about device abandonment, a lot of times we discuss it in the context of after the evaluation and after they've been provided the device. And I want to say that to challenge everyone, hey, device abandonment starts right here when we don't include and ask enough questions, in the evaluation. So this particular family had gotten their young man, actually adult, I think he was 25, out of bed and into his wheelchair for the evaluation. And ALS, we're thinking eye gaze device. The family thought it was so cool. He thought it was so cool. So we tried out. He was very successful with the eye gaze device in the chair. And then lo and behold, he device abandonment started right away after getting the device. And why? We didn't find out enough information about where he was during most of his day, which was in bed, and he had nystagmus. And while he could use the device in an upright position, it was more difficult for him to use it lying supine in bed. It was difficult for him to use it in the chair upright, his eyes kind of were more at rest when he was relaxed and lying down. So we ended up providing a low-tech solution for him, and blowing up a communication board and putting it on his ceiling, because he would lie in bed due to the fatigue with ALS, and talk to mom with the communication device on the ceiling and a laser pointer on his glasses. And so, you know, again, if we involve the family and ask all the right questions about their day-to-day environment, that's going to, cut down on that. There are prerequisites to using AAC. So this one was mentioned earlier, and it is a pet peeve of mine when I hear, people say no for different reasons. And sometimes it's just due to lack of education on the topic. And so we can be that champion for the user, or for the potential AAC user, knowing that there's no disability disqualification meter when using AAC. So there's no rule book out there saying you're not ready and you can't get one, so it's really, we have to try things, right? And there isn't going to be a tool that works right off the bat for every single user, and sometimes it's a long process, and explaining that to a family. But when there are no opportunities given, sometimes that process becomes even longer for the family, right? And so how is that? How are our families feeling when they're faced with these challenges? They already have, a challenge of maybe a medically complex family member, and that they want to communicate with. And then, with these myths, we might be presenting an additional challenge. And so I would like to share with you this video, and it's an interview with a parent.
Hi. So we have been talking about misconceptions that therapists can generally or usually fall into that can really affect the outcome of using communication and trying new devices. And some of those misconceptions that we've been discussing are things like when therapists are afraid to try something new, or we're going to try and master, quote unquote, master low tech before high tech, which we know is not a requirement. Or even that, well, we have a vision difference or vision impairment, and so we're dismissing things like eye gaze or other high tech technologies because of that impairment. And so to have this conversation, we have with us Erica Chapman, and she is the parent liaison with Florence District 1 and Florence, South Carolina, Florence 1 schools in Florence, South Carolina, with me. And also she is the parent of a student who uses a high-tech communication device. So I want to get her perspective on their journey and what it took to overcome some of those misconceptions. So Erica, tell me more about you and Subi.
So Subi is 11 now, and she started in preschool at Florence 1 when she was about 4.5, and she is considered nonverbal. She has cerebral palsy, and she has cortical visual impairment. She has limited use of her hands, but good head control, and so she has pretty fair receptive language, but not expressive. She struggles, and she can only say a few words, but we've always been able to tell she had a lot more she wanted to share, a lot more she wanted to express. And so she's had great private speech therapy and speech therapy at school, but we never could seem to come up with a plan or opportunity or options for her other than just trying to improve speaking, trying to speak more. And so I would research, and I would ask questions, and I knew that there were eye gaze devices and different programs, but I was always told that because of her visual impairment that wasn't an option, or because she still seemed to have such limited language that she wasn't ready for it. And it was frustrating because I would see videos of other kids utilizing some of this amazing equipment and just wish that for her she had that opportunity. So, it was at least 5 years of us kind of pushing and searching and being very faithful in therapy. And then finally we had the opportunity to trial the eye gaze, and I was kind of skeptical. But basically the first time she tried it, she showed that she could at least utilize it, that it was an option for her. And it has just opened up a world for her and for our family. And so it's amazing to see her growing and like learning a new language, and us as a family basically learning a new language. So it's definitely taking time and investment, but the reward in seeing her do independent work, even just independent entertainment, she can choose what she wants, tell us and express what she wants, has been incredible. And it does take commitment as a family to keep it in front of her and to make it a priority and to train the people that come into her life how to use it and why it's there. But it's just made a tremendous impact for our whole family. It's made a big difference.
That's so great to hear. And I'm personally happy to hear you say those things because I am still involved. So I have enjoyed working with her as well, and you as a family as well. What would you say to a therapist who thinking, we can't try anything new, or the vision impairment is automatically going to impede? Now knowing what you know, what would you say?
I would beg them to become educated and informed. That I think for so many of our kids, this is the way the future is going, and that to always assume competence and capability, and not to assume that the limitation is too great, and that the worst thing you can do is just not give them a chance. And that I do feel like, of course, everybody has different things they're better at, but as a therapist, if you have students that are primarily nonverbal, especially to learn how to give them this option, because it really is, it's life-changing for these kids and for their families. And that they don't have to be at a certain place in a skill level to learn. They can be way down at hardly any intentional communication that you can tell verbally, and they can still make great gains, and it opens up a whole new world to them. So just give it a try and always assume competence.
Yeah. So I'm going to stop it there. We definitely always want to assume competence. I love that she said that. And the other thing that I noted that she says and throughout the interview is that that she was just looking for an opportunity. And so, as we are, in my galaxy analogy here, providing opportunities, that, if we're wearing a superhero cape, so to speak, or my Guardians of the Galaxy analogy there, that, that's what our cape maybe says, that we're opportunity providers. And so that we're not perpetuating the idea of someone is not ready, and that, we're always assuming competence. So AAC is only for persons who are nonverbal. That's just, a myth that I have heard repeatedly. And in that interview, I didn't get to show you the whole thing, but she and I talk more about that. But we know the reality is that even persons with limited or some verbal skills can still benefit from AAC, and it doesn't stop them from being verbal. And how do we document this is a question that a lot of therapists may have, because they're thinking, as they should be, about funding. And what do I write in a funding report if I have someone who's verbal? And we're not talking about a funding if they're unintelligible, because obviously they're verbal and they're just not intelligible. So of course, that's a different a way to get a device. But if you just have limited verbal skills, and maybe I can speak a few words or even a few sentences, but that's all I can say, you have to think, how do I document this? So you're thinking about functional communication. Are those few words functional? Are they able to meet all the communication functions, communicative functions? And there's a big list of those that we're going to look at later, with the words that I can say. And if not, document that. Are they able to do more with the device verbally than their verbal speech? And document that, have a comparison in that funding report. So my case example, and I'll try and give two really quickly. I was working with a very young person, I think 4 years old, and this child was diagnosed with autism and apraxia of speech, and only had less than 5 intelligible words, and then was very limited verbally, probably due to the autism. So once we got his device, and a year later, he was doing 8-word sentences on his device and 4 words verbally. So it really was improving his verbal skills, and he was more advanced with what he could say with the device, but the verbal was still being improved. And another example I had is a teenager. This is recently, is a recent user of AAC, had never had a device before, but can sometimes say 5-word sentences. Just he doesn't do it every day, and he doesn't do it often, and he has autism. And so with the device, though, he was doing 7-8-word sentences and putting contractions on things that he could demonstrate even with literacy that he couldn't do verbally. So there are ways of documenting exactly how the AAC is benefiting the person. All right, another myth: communication starts with yes and no. This I hear a lot, and it's really sad that sometimes it comes down to, well, they can't answer a yes and no question properly. Well, yes and no questions are sometimes even opinion questions. Even when you think you are phrasing a yes no question in a way that it's not about an opinion, but it is. So again, there's no prerequisites to using AAC. Mastery of yes no questions is not expected before moving on to other types of communication and typical development of language. So when I'm confronted with this, I turn it right back on the person, and say, think about your children and your typically developing child. Were you only confronting them with yes no questions at the beginning of their language development? And the answer is always going to be no. That's not what you were doing. So definitely take a look and think about that. This particular picture here represents, it's a veteran that I worked with, and he was actually turned away from 2, not 1, but 2 clinics because he could not answer yes and no questions after having a brain injury. And so 2 clinics, and one of those was a VA hospital. Turned him away from getting an AAC device for that reason. And we got him in our program and discovered that he just wanted to talk about what music he wanted to listen to and the food he wanted to eat and the games he wanted to play. And so he could use an eye gaze device just fine. And, you know, did his yes, no improve? Maybe, but that shouldn't have held him back from getting or obtaining a device. Communication only occurs in the clinic, another myth. And you know, what I'd like to say about this is it happens everywhere. Communication happens everywhere. So are we really focusing on the E in that SETT framework and thinking about all of the person's environments? This next video is just a quick example from a client that I've worked with in the past. And this is from the Minnesota Technology for Home program. And I think actually had this video up, but I might have closed it. So we'll start it. Let you guys meet Emily.
Technology for
Get this queued up. Here we go.
Emily is a beautiful 16-year-old girl. She's in the high school. She is in 10th grade. Before Technology for Home, there was no communication with Emily. As a mother, it's very painful not being able to know what your child wants or needs, or it's just very painful not to ever hear I love you or goodbye or hello. Always been told that Emily would never be able to communicate. She's at her baseline. She was not going to make any more progress. The speech therapists have always shot my ideas down when I come back from an assistive technology conference all excited, go into the school, talk to the therapists, and they've always said no, it's not going to happen. She won't be able to use this technology.
When I learned about the Technology for Home program, I started thinking about the people on my caseload and who might be able to benefit from it right away. Megan is a good mom and a strong advocate for her daughter, and communication has been a struggle for her life. Just because Emily hasn't been able to, use words to communicate, it doesn't mean that she doesn't have the thoughts and feelings and emotions that she would like to share with her family. And not being an expert in assistive technology myself, it's hard to keep up on the advancements. The opportunity to bring a consultant into her home who does know what the current state of assistive technology is, to be able to work with her and see what her needs are and make recommendations, that I was hopeful for them that they would be able to make a connection and something might work out.
The day that Emily was able to communicate, I was visiting her at school. I didn't know what I was going to expect. And quite frankly, neither did the staff or her mom. We're all holding out hope. We set up a communication device for her that uses her eyes to operate it. And so it's a technology called eye gaze. And on the screen, there was a whiteboard, and on the bottom, all the colors. Very tiny colors to get to. And we hadn't calibrated her to the device, and that means the device wasn't really paired or hadn't learned enough about Emily's eyes for it to be perfect. Yet she was able to get every single one of those colors, and she was determined, and she did it. And so we're having natural conversation with her, and that was wonderful.
I went into the room right at an amazing time. So they had put up a program, it was a paint program, and they told Emily to choose a color, and she chose it, and she colored with it. Everyone in the room was tearing up, goosebumps, because Emily, for the first time in her life, communicated. She was able to communicate in a way that wasn't crying, body language. She was communicating with her eyes. It was phenomenal. It was an absolutely amazing experience.
So after Emily showed us everything she could do, the fun didn't stop there. The teachers ran down the hall. They got her favorite things. They ran back. And we quickly took a picture of all of her favorite things and put them on the screen. Then, using that same technology, she was able to choose her next activity with her eyes, and didn't do so just one time or in a sequential row of activities. She chose everything she wanted. It was her time, her desire, and it was communication. It was beautiful.
Emily is lucky to have people like Technology for Home that realize her need and do what they can to meet that need for her, to go above and beyond to get her this eye gaze computer so she can learn communication. As she gets older, people are telling us, well, this isn't a reality. You know, she's not going to communicate beyond this. And Technology for Home came in and said, we're going to make this happen. She can communicate.
So I'm going to stop that video there. You know, and we don't all have the opportunity, you know, to go into the home like that particular program was able to go into her home. But I wanted to share this with you because if you're really looking at, you know, the E in that set, the environment, you're going to ask all of the right questions maybe to get that information. And, you know, we commonly, this particular myth, I'm referring to the comments that we get. Sometimes you're on a team and, you know, one person, particularly the family or the parent, may say, well, they're doing this, but no one else on the team, you know, has seen it. So encourage that parent, you know, recognize that it doesn't always happen in your clinic, in your therapy room. So, you know, ask the parent, are you comfortable sending in a video? Can you explain more about, you know, what's happening during those times of communication? And then moving on from there, start where the person is. So communication devices can only be activated with the hands is another myth. Some alternate access methods are, you know, switch scanning. And remember, a switch does not need to be operated with your hands. Think about the whole body as placement for that switch. Head tracking, eye gaze with a switch, or just eye gaze, EMG signal. Partner assisted scanning, that's very low tech. Even you can use it with high tech or low tech, but partner assisted scanning, that's really starting at the level where they are. For someone who's medically complex, keep that in mind. If a person is mobile, they do not qualify for an AAC device. This is another myth, believe it or not, that I would hear all the time. But mobility, the reality is mobility has no impact on the need to use an AAC device. And the decision to fund an AAC device is made on a person's inability to be understood and their communication level, not their mobility level. So what does mobility actually affect? It directly affects how a person will transport their device. So it has a direct correlation to the accessories that they will need when you're writing up your evaluation funding report. So will they need a mount or a carrying case or a key guard? But it doesn't impact the need to use a device. If a person can use their hands, they only qualify for a touch device. And that's a myth. The reality is that the AAC evaluation is a snapshot in time. And so you have to ask yourself about the functional use of their hands. Okay, how functional is it for all day, everyday use? There shouldn't be a time when you're doing an evaluation that you're considering that they're going to shut their voice off, because you and I don't put our voices away, right? So if that person experiences extreme fatigue or a muscle changes throughout the day of their function level, if they can't coordinate their movement, then they may not have functional use for the purpose of a communication device through touch. And some, I've listed here some disorders that may, kind of fall in line with this example. CP, spinal muscular atrophy, ALS, MS. I've actually had quite a few patients, even with ALS, that were turned away from clinics with no device, and being told no because you're not ready for a certain type of device because you can still use your hands. But what they weren't considering is the functional use. When you're writing an AAC report, you cannot write about progression, as far as you can't comment that the person can, touch now, but we know they're going to lose their ability to touch in the near future, and so they deserve this type of device. So that you can't do. You can't write that in a funding report. But what you can document is, and you can only do this if you've asked all the right questions about their daily function, you can write about whether or not that the use of their hands is functional. And if you can determine that they don't have functional use of their hands every day, maybe mornings are best, but by the afternoon they don't, then getting them a touch device would be a disservice to them. It's kind of like you telling them, you have to put your voice on the shelf. So that's just something to remember when we're doing evaluations. So another myth: an illiterate adult cannot use an AAC device. And I put adult in here because when we are working with children, a lot of times they are not literate yet, but we get them devices, right? So why would that be any different for an adult? And believe it or not, I have worked with adults who were turned away from assistive technology clinics without a device because they were illiterate or away from a therapist. And the reality is that literacy has no effect on a person's ability to use low-tech or high-tech device. And what you have to do is find a simple system that the AAC user is comfortable with. And that's what's key when you're working with someone who's illiterate. So a case example, I was working with an adult with ALS who was illiterate and had been told that he could not get an AAC evaluation, and we, through the ALS Association, was able to give him a loaner device, and he was so happy, and he just needed photographic symbols, and photographic symbols are just photos, right? And so he was able to communicate with those, and right away communicate with his nurse and his caregiver about the things that he needed in the home, and that was wonderful. Another example, I was working with a business tycoon. I mean, he was a CEO of a company, and no one, maybe some of his own family members, didn't know that he was illiterate. And so he also had been turned away from a clinic with no device, and pictographic symbols happen to work for him. But try different things. Visual scene displays may actually help a person who's illiterate as well. Okay, so we're going to get into myths versus realities in AAC treatment, experiences and case examples. I'll try and leave enough time for questions because I see we do have some. All right, getting an AAC device will solve all communication breakdowns. We know that that's not true, and I have linked another article from Toby Dynavox that I like that nicely kind of gives you some talking points on that. But the bottom line is, the reality is, it's not going to solve every communication breakdown. And that's why you should have multi modes of communicating, and be working on conversation repair strategies with those who can and do that, or if they you know, have a lower cognition and where they're not at the cognitive level of working on a conversational repair strategy, then you're working with the team of people who are their communication partners, and you're working with them on their ability to circumvent these conversational breakdowns, whether that be a mixture of low tech and high tech, or other tools, but that's what you do. So another myth is only the AAC user needs device training. And that's just not true. Everyone on the support team for the student or persons needs training. So once that device comes back, what I like to do is I like to start training the parent or the family or the caregiver right alongside that person. And so even those who are tech savvy need training. And I'll say the flip side of that, even those who aren't tech savvy, they definitely need the training. So definitely keep going with that, because that's going to help you avoid device abandonment as well. Labeling equals communication. This is a pet peeve of mine, and it's so easy to fall into as a therapist because we are used to what? Taking data, right? But when you ask, find the, show me the, look at the, touch the, those are labeling, right? That's a task for testing. It's not communication. And the communicative functions, and I love this partner strategies booklet. It's from a clinic in Canada, but I just like some of the things that they had in their booklet here, and I put the link for you guys. But here are, you know, those communicative functions, and this is what we should be working on in modeling, right? And instead of testing, you model the language, and you use it in real time in a real activity, and that's how an AAC, you know, user learns. Okay, so another one, a myth is communication is stationary. So a lot of times we might fall into the habit of having our communicator only be communicating while at the therapy table or at a desk or while seated. And for those kiddos and clients who are mobile, sometimes it's best to get them up and out of the table and doing something if you can. When you're working with children, play during therapy is great. If you're working with a multidisciplinary team, if you can piggy bank into OT or into physical therapy, you're going to get a lot more communication or different types of communication out of that child than in your therapy room alone. So think about how much communication happens when a typically developing child is on the move and on the go, and start there if you're not as successful while seated, you know, at the therapy table. The client has to be 100% accurate at using the trial device before submitting for funding or while using the device in treatment. This myth comes from that data that we all have had driven into our heads. The reality is the act of communicating, it's not something that you need to be collecting right versus wrong. You need to be taking data on whether they are reaching those communicative functions. So if you have communication screen up and let's say you have an art page on your device, and the child chooses paints, but you are coloring, you know, and you want to say, okay, do you want more crayons? And you're hoping that they choose more crayons, or you've modeled more crayons and they choose paints. Sometimes with this myth, the inclination is to say, no, you're wrong. That's not the word we're looking for. But that's not what you do in that moment. You just keep it going naturally and model naturally what you want them to say or do, and you respond naturally. So they chose paint. So you say, oh, but we're not painting right now. but I do have crayons, and then maybe you touch crayons to give them that model. So here is a question I want you to think about. What type of data do you collect? Think about how you've written your goals or that treatment plan, and what am I really trying to gain improvement with the communicative functions, or am I gaining right versus wrong labeling task or cognition type of task, because that's not communication. Here's a quick example of this, and this is from Toby Dynavox. So thank you for the video. We'll just play a little bit of it.
Use your words, Will. Say
We need to stir it.
You're
Okay.
right.
Go ahead
Would you
and stir
turn
it.
around and do that?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Will. Use your spoon. Good, you stir. Here you go. Can I help you? Can I help you?
Yeah.
Here,
Now
you
it
do
smells good.
Yeah.
You take your
I
hand.
can hear the sizzle.
Yeah, put your hand up mine. There you go.
I can do it.
There you go.
Nice. You're doing it.
Good job, Will. Is that good? Will you eat pizza on Sunday?
Part of this.
Yeah.
Since you guys. So I think the theme would be just setting this up as you're doing something with them, and just.
You want to taste it
getting
already?
Yeah.
I know what you mean when you're so hungry. But I think it's probably not going to taste very good when it's frozen.
Taste it.
We gotta wait until it's cooked, buddy. Yeah? Yeah.
This is hard.
Yeah.
Waiting is hard.
Waiting is always hard. It's hard for me.
So I'm going to stop it there. I love it. What they did when he was stirring the food, he said the word pizza, but they're not cooking a pizza right now, right? And so naturally they said, oh, we're going to have pizza on this day. And so they were just responding naturally. And then when it came to the device, he did the same thing. They just put it on the stove. It's still sort of frozen in the pot. And he says, taste it. And then, and so naturally they just, talked to him about waiting. And I loved how she modeled. It's so hard to wait, isn't it? So that's exactly what we have to do. And instead of focusing on labeling and getting nouns and things 100% correct, we really have to, I feel, shift the focus there and think about the type of data we're collecting. All right, so here's my analogy about I am Groot. So Guardians of the Galaxy, if you're not a superhero fan, I'm sorry. But Groot is a lovable character, especially the baby Groot in that video or movie series. And he can only say 3 words, his I am Groot. And so they're always trying to figure out what he's saying. And so what's the comparison with AAC use? Sometimes we can get stuck in I am Groot behavior. And I'm going to give one quick example. Sometimes, or 2 different examples of this, sometimes we can get stuck with our routine of therapy, and maybe you are working with children of different levels in a group, and let's say you're going to do a welcome and everyone does a greeting as they come into the therapy session, and one student can already greet, but everyone else may be still working on pushing the greeting hello, and this student is still expected to push hello, but they've already mastered that. So think about something else to expand their language. What's the next possible step in their greeting? Well, maybe greeting someone by name or their group members by name. Another example I can give is not accepting all modes of communication. So if a child has a gesture, let's say they have a gesture for more, and you on the device have more and some snack options. And so they sign more, and then you say, oh, but say it on here, say it on your device. Well, that is very frustrating. That's the child's going to feel like Groot, I'm Groot, I'm Groot, I'm Groot. He's over and over again. More, I've already said it, you know? So what can you do instead? Model. So accept what they said. They signed more, and you say with the device, oh, you told me more. Great. More what? More drink? You know, and just keep modeling and keep expanding on their ability to accept all modes of communication. So ways to avoid ungroup behavior: progress them on to next steps, expand that language, acknowledge when AAC is used no matter what modality, expand on what they say. If they say one word, you model 2. If they say 3 words, you model 4 on the device. Praising the AAC user appropriately. And so our last myth: any potential AAC user can get the AAC resources they need whenever they see a school-based therapist or go to an outpatient clinic. Unfortunately, that's a myth. AAC myths that we've discussed today, the sad reality is that they directly correlate to persons with limited to no communication today in 2021 still not getting the appropriate help that they need when they need it when it comes to AAC. And another reason why that's a sad reality is cultural bias and discrimination still in 2021 still affects a person's ability to gain the appropriate help with AAC when they need it. And so what can we do about it? Well, we can start by dispelling myths in our own practice. Think, am I caught in this rut? And snap out of it. Speak up and educate others. And if you haven't checked out That's Unheard Of by Asha, please do. It's a good website, great resource. This culture covers more than you think, actually links to one resource on that website. And I just want to read from these fact cards that, cultural competence encompasses knowledge and understanding of any number of dimensions of diversity. And what's one of those things? Disability. And our AAC users and potential users are often misunderstood, and some of these myths might be holding them back. So that is it. Those are some resources for you guys from this presentation. And I thank you for joining. And here is my contact information. And I'm going to now take a look at the questions and see what was there. Okay, so someone asked me if they have had the struggle with vision therapists. Do you have any articles that have been successful in communicating this to vision therapists? So I must say, even the family that I interviewed, the mother that I interviewed, CVI is a big misconception that they cannot use devices, and that's just one vision disorder, but it just stuck out in my mind. And so a lot of times what I do is I will work with the vision therapist. I will actually, if it's an eye gaze student, I will do something like gaze viewer and record and heat map their gaze, and play it back for the vision therapist, and really try and get them on my team by working with them in a partnership. So I hope that kind of answers. Renee, please email me and I can see if I can share any other article with you. Okay, Tori said she's a school-based therapist, often sees PECs used in the classroom. Assuming PECs versus AAC devices are considered due to cost and funding of an AAC device, how do you determine through evaluations if PECs or an AAC device is the most appropriate means of functional communication for a student in the schools? So for one thing, Tony, and I might have said your name, that's Tony. For one thing, Tony, I do go ahead and check, well, our district, we do some funding reports for AAC devices in our district. So we're always looking at both of those options. So not all districts have someone in the district who is actually writing funding reports and seeking devices that way. So that does make a difference. What I say is if a child is really, really successful, sometimes success equals that they're ready for the next level of communication. And we know that PECS is a great tool, a great low-tech tool, but it doesn't allow them to say everything they want to say when they want to say it. And that should be the measure of looking at functional communication devices. So I hope that sort of answers your question. Heather, and Tony, if it didn't answer it enough, please email me. Heather Hart, we've been able to get a device for an autistic student. He's telling me things like food, and his, in your opinion, he should be offered a snack, but the teacher will state he isn't hungry. He pushed it 3 times and before lunch, and I feel we give him what he requests. The teacher feels he is task avoiding. As an OTSA, we give him what he asks for. Am I wrong? He's still learning to use this device. So 2 quick thoughts on that, and then Heather, please do email me if I don't cover it all. But I would say that if you can, with an autistic student, so when they're asking for something, it doesn't mean that they need to get a big meal. So if it is allowable to give him some snack, maybe 2 or 3 little pieces, then that's okay to incorporate. But if it isn't allowable and it really is not, it's instruction time and not snack time, then you might also, with the device, want to build on routine, a behavior support within the device, if that's helpful. And depending on the type of device that you're using, there might even be built-in behavioral supports. So it's okay to also teach them at the same time that what they ask for isn't available, and going back to their visual schedule and looking at, answering the question of when they are going to be able to have that time to eat. So it's a very thin line, I think, of a balance of when to do which. But I would maybe even try both ways of approaching it and see which one gets you the desired behavior. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay, and I don't know how long I'm able to go with these, but we've gotten 2 more. And Heather, I will respond. Oh, thank you, Heather. Okay, Sarah, I have students that transition out from the adult living skills program, and they have to return the district owned device when they age out. We've attempted to have the regional center to conduct evaluations when they transition out, but lately the comments from the regional center will say, won't pictures suffice to avoid assessment. Oh, that's so sad. But these students have devices for all their other their school careers. Any suggestions? So I would say I would answer to them, no, pictures don't suffice. I would give them reasons why low-tech tools don't allow them to say everything that they want to say when they want to say it. A picture, in this case, for long-term device users, pictures are a backup method, but not the method. And that funding report, you have to kind of state, when you're going for a high-tech device, in the funding report, you state why low-tech devices don't work. I would feed that information to them. I would also, I kind of lost my train of thought there. There was another point I was going to make, Sarah, but please email me for more comments on that, because I think I do have more ideas. but I think maybe even getting voc involved, voc rehab involved, if that's possible. Usually around transition age, teenage age, you have to check with your state's voc rehab program to determine at what age they can start, but it's well before they graduate. And they can perhaps even get equipment that way, or looking at providing the parents and families with other resources to get equipment, maybe going through your, take a look at getting some education through the state program for the regional center. That might help. So those are just a few ideas. Hopefully that was helpful. Thank you all for coming. And please do email me if you have any more questions.
Rachell, we do have one question in the chat. They're asking if you have any favorite eye gaze activities.
Oh, yes. I have lots of favorite eye gaze activities, but if you are looking for free ones, check out Toby Dynavox actually has a free part of their website called Eye Gaze Games, where they have links to other games. And one link is the Chrome Music Lab. And so that could be a fun, engaging way to work with eye gaze. I also love books. A lot of students just love to read. So some programs. So Tar Heel Reader, again, free access to books that they can turn the page themselves with their eyes. So that's fun. But cost programs. I do a lot with Sensory Guru, IFX, also Magic Eye, and Look to Read. So Smartbox has some programs out there. Look to Read, Look to Learn, or some programs. And then Board Makers, Toby Dynavox Board Makers Reading Avenue, and some of their virtual field trips or book expeditions, or education expeditions are fun if you have a Boardmaker account. So all of those things are eye gaze accessible. And Ginger Tiger is, you can Google that company. It's a subscription based, but they have a eye gaze button that you push, and it will take out every activity that isn't eye gaze accessible and only have the eye gaze ones. You can use Ginger Tiger with Switch, kids who are operating a computer with a Switch, eye gaze, or by touch. So that's a good subscription to have, because it's probably going to meet the needs of most of your users. Oh yes, Help Kids Learn. I love Help Kids Learn. Yes, thank you, Lori, for mentioning that.
All right, that looks like about it. I thank you so much, Rachell, for all of the wonderful information. And I hope everyone has enjoyed the presentation. That'll be the end of the presentation for today.
Thank you.
You.